legislative wrecking ball about to devastate the lives of millions of Americans. That needs to be the focus of this hearing. While Senate Republicans are making these small tweaks to their bill, countless millions of people across the country feel like they're living on a knife's edge. Nurses and firefighters, teachers and machinists, they're living paycheck to paycheck, barely staying ahead of the bills. They're overworked, and they're concerned about providing for their kids or caring for an older loved one. They see a rigged economy that creates enormous prosperity at the top, but denies it to nearly everybody else. The plan Donald Trump and Republicans are scrambling to pass is going to do virtually nothing for them. In fact, it would make their lives worse. It's no exaggeration to say the Republican plan would ruin millions of lives to help the ultra-wealthy buy yachts and vacation homes. Their bill isn't a tax and spending cut. It's a class war. It is caviar over kids. It is Mar-a-Lago over the middle class. The version that passed the House, the only text we have to go by now since this is all unfolding in secret, includes the largest cuts to health care and food assistance in American history. More than $800 billion cut out of Medicaid. Nearly $300 billion cut from the Affordable Care Act. More than $500 billion in automatic cuts to Medicare. For Donald Trump and Republicans to hide behind the flimsy claim that this will not cut benefits is absurd. To say their bill protects seniors and kids and veterans and people with disabilities is absurd. It's insulting to the intelligence of millions of people who have health insurance today and stand to lose it as a direct result of this bill. 16 million Americans lose their health care. Working class and middle class Americans will be ensnared in a thicket of red tape, costing them their Medicaid and ACA benefits and making health coverage entirely unaffordable. This is going to inflame the mental health crisis in America. It's going to set back our progress against fentanyl deaths. Kids with disabilities will lose home care and school-based services. The cuts are going to shutter rural hospitals and take nurses out of nursing homes, exposing seniors to abuse and neglect. My view is the $300 billion cut to SNAP can only be described as cruel. 2 million kids lose some or all of their food assistance they receive today. It's just unthinkable that elected leaders in a country as rich as ours would knowingly inflict hunger on millions of kids. It'll set those kids back for years and years. A new study on the health issue found that the bill will cost thousands and thousands of lives, preventable deaths each year. Why make that choice? Why ruin all these millions of lives by stripping away their health insurance and jacking up the cost of living to pay for handouts to big corporations and the wealthy? That is an awful choice that Donald Trump and Republicans have made. The bill gives big corporations $1 trillion in new tax breaks, and they're hiding the cost once again with budget gimmicks. It would give the top 0.1% of earners a tax break of more than $250,000 each year. Looking just at the tax changes, the typical lower-income family would be lucky enough to cover groceries for a week in the Republican plan. 14 million families, particularly those of modest incomes, are going to get a tax increase. And when you factor in the Medicaid cuts, the food assistance cuts, and the tariffs that the Secretary who joins us today once denied American families would not pay, nobody outside the fabulously wealthy is going to benefit from the tax changes at all. That overall Trump agenda is a big net loser for the vast majority of Americans. That's not tax reform. That's not a spending cut. That is a class war. Millions of atypical families will be made worse off, and tens of thousands of people will die preventable deaths each year to pay for tax breaks for corporations and the very rich. That's what Republicans have to offer. So this committee has a chance now to have a serious debate I'm sure there are one or two people in the room who may share a different view than I do. Let's have a serious debate, because this is a watershed moment that's going to change our country for generations to come, and it should not be playing out in secret. And one last point I want to mention, Mr. Chairman. I think there was questions about the process. We are asking for the kind of open markup, the kind of thing we did on clean energy taxes, where we debated in this room and elsewhere for hours and hours in open, and there were lots of amendments. Let's do that for the big issues. We did it on clean energy.
Well, before I get to you, Secretary Bessent, I just have to say the markup you're talking about had nothing to do with what went into the reconciliation bill. And the reconciliation bills that were done in the last administration were done exactly through the same process that we are pursuing today.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, clean energy is in the reconciliation bill.
But not the one we marked up.
We had a big debate about it, and essentially it is those issues that Republicans are against, and we debated it in open session. I want to do that. That's what my colleagues want to do.
Well, as you can see, Mr. Secretary, there are different points of view up here. We're here to hear from you. We appreciate you being here with us, and you may proceed with your statement.
Thank you. Chairman Crapo, Ranking Member Wyden, and members of the committee, I'm grateful to join you here today. Treasury is committed to working with Congress to improve our nation's finances, create new jobs, and strengthen the economy. We look forward to coordinating with you on the President's budget and his tax priorities in the coming weeks. As part of this effort, I wish to highlight today the Treasury Department's efforts to advance President Trump's economic agenda on tax and trade. First, tax. I'm pleased to report the Treasury has just concluded its most successful filing season in years, and we did so while improving efficiencies and cutting costs at the IRS. Critics of the President's efforts to modernize the IRS warned that the effort would result in a 10% shortfall in receipts. Instead, the opposite happened. April receipts this year were up 9.5% over the previous year, and receipts in May were up 14.7% over the previous year. Most remarkably, the President was able to achieve these results while reducing $20 billion in waste on planned IT spending at the IRS. This success has taken place against a backdrop of one of the most consequential tax proposals ever to come before Congress, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The One Big Beautiful Bill will make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. This will provide individuals and businesses with certainty and build economic momentum. The legislation is clearly and squarely aimed at boosting the working and middle class and reinvigorating American manufacturing. According to the Council of Economic Advisors, the One Big Beautiful Bill will raise take-home pay between $7,800 and $13,300 for the average family of four. It will increase wages between $6,100 to $11,600 for the average worker, and it will cement no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and tax cuts for seniors. The One Big Beautiful Bill will also incentivize unprecedented investment in U.S. manufacturing. The legislation will provide 100% expensing for new factories, as well as existing factories that expand operations and support Made in America. And it will streamline burdensome permitting processes that often stand in the way of new manufacturing products. It's time for this country to start building things again, and the One Big Beautiful Bill makes this possible. The administration is grateful for the House's efforts to advance the One Big Beautiful Bill. We now look forward to working closely with this committee and other members of the Senate to get this legislation to the President's desk. Second, trade is the second topic I wish to highlight. The progress we have made on tax issues over the last 4 months complements the significant progress we have made in rebalancing the global economy. Since I last testified before Congress in May, the President announced an historic U.S.-UK trade deal. This arrangement, which creates a $5 billion export opportunity for American ranchers, farmers, and manufacturers, is a preview of what's to come. Dozens of countries have engaged the administration thus far with offers to improve their trade relations with the United States. This includes China. Yesterday, in the early hours of the morning, I returned from successful negotiations in London with the Chinese delegation. I'm confident these negotiations will bring balance to the economic relationship between our two economies. China has a singular opportunity to stabilize its economy by shifting away from excess production towards greater consumption, but the country needs to be a reliable partner in trade negotiations. If China will course correct by upholding its end of the initial trade agreement we outlined in Geneva, and I believe after our talks in London they likely will, then a rebalancing of the world's two largest economies is possible. I would also like to thank His Majesty's government for arranging the use of the magnificent Lancaster House as a meeting venue for the United States and Chinese delegations to help stabilize our trade. By challenging the decades-old status quo on tax and trade, President Trump is bringing new life into the American economy. More than 500,000 private sector payroll jobs have been added since January. Most importantly, inflation in the U.S. is at its slowest pace since 2021 on decelerating cost increases for shelter, food, and energy. After 4 years of price increases diminishing the U.S. standard of living, inflation is showing substantial improvement due to the administration's policies. Furthermore, the labor market remains strong with low unemployment and plentiful labor demand as job openings remain high. The strength has been exemplified in the recent performance of the stock market. And I'd like to respond to the ranking member's charges of the distributional aspects of the One Big Beautiful Bill. I would note that thanks to his party's policies, the summer of 2024 saw a record amount of European vacations taken by Americans and record food bank usage. That's what their policies did. The president's bold leadership on these issues has laid the foundation for a golden age economy. With your help, we can build on that foundation to create even greater prosperity and abundance for the American people. We'll hope you will join us in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And I'll start out with questions. Before I make a question, I'd like to just say it is refreshing to hear you talk about the fact that the United States is finally back in the game of trade negotiations. Our former president, President Biden, proudly announced in his presidency that he would not engage in bilateral trade negotiations and refused to have a single one during his term. Now we are engaged in trade negotiations, and other countries are coming to the table to deal with this, and I was very pleased to hear your report on that. My first question gets to the tax reform issue that you've already referenced. As you know and can tell from what's already been said today, there are two very different views as to what it is that we are doing. Nobody can deny, though, that our top focus is to extend the Tax Code and Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017. Could you tell us for just a minute what would happen if Congress does not extend the 2017 tax code?
Senator, I believe it would be what is known in economics as a sudden stop. It would be cataclysmic for the economy if this is not extended. And as always, working Americans would bear the brunt. There would be job losses, economic losses in markets, a substantial increase in our budget deficit due to a decrease in tax revenues, and it is unthinkable what would happen.
Well, thank you. And let's talk about what would happen if we do extend the TCJA and the other pro-growth provisions that we have in the legislation that we are working on right now. Can you talk about the importance of the pro-growth tax provisions, the economic impact, and some of the existing some of the existing and new provisions will have on workers?
Yes. So first, let's examine the extension and permanence of the TCJA. Making this permanent will give an economic impetus to the U.S. economy as households and businesses have greater certainty. I've met with numerous business leaders since I was confirmed on January 28th, and while they are confident that the bill would pass, without 100% surety, they are holding back on their capital expenditure plans. Even last week, they told me that there is a substantial planned increase that will be in capital expenditures that will be unleashed by U.S. and foreign corporations that will benefit American workers. In terms of households, we will see the continued increase for working Americans from TCJA, which led to strong non-inflationary growth, as opposed to what we saw during the Biden years of substantial inflation. Furthermore, the president's proposals for no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, making auto loans deductible for new American cars, and tax savings for seniors will benefit working Americans and the bottom 50% of wage earners. So it is a unique combination that it will provide substantial business stimulus and it will provide substantial relief to the affordability crisis that has been generated over the past 4 years.
Thank you. And finally, my last question is, critics have recently as just now, called this bill a tax cut for billionaires, even when the data shows that the middle-income families benefited the most from the Trump tax cuts and have the most to lose if they expire. Can you tell us what the benefits of this legislation are for working families who are still recovering from the cost of record inflation under the administration?
Yes, sir. They will, as I outlined in my opening remarks, they will see substantial increases in their household income. And more importantly, they will see real wage growth as they did under TCJA in 2018, 2019, going into January 2020, pre-COVID, when hourly workers did better than supervisory workers. The bottom 50% of working Americans had household net worth increases that were substantially in excess of the top 10% and 1% household increases.
And you may not have this data at your fingertips, but my recollection is that at that time, as a result of the TCJA, the lower and middle income families had a higher percentage rate of income growth than did the wealthy. Do you have that statistic at your?
I don't have it here, but that's captured in what I said, where hourly workers did better than supervisory workers. So the benefits inured to the bottom 50% of wage earners,
right,
much greater than the top 10%.
All right. Thank you very much. Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Secretary, around here we use the Joint Committee on Taxation to analyze key legislation. And they took a look at the House bill, the bill that you and the administration are in favor of. And the Joint Committee on Taxation found that under the House bill, high earners who bring in several $1 million a year will get tax breaks of $250,000. This comes from the people that we asked to do the analysis. So if we got to make choices, who are you with? Are you with those high earners that the Joint Committee on Taxation found? Or do you think it's more important that 2 million hungry kids in America have enough to eat?
Senator, I think you're playing a game of semantics here. You're using absolute.
Well, why don't you just answer the question?
Why don't you ask an honest question?
It's Joint Committee on Taxation,
because we are talking absolutes, and the answer is percentages. With TCJA, the top 10% share of taxes went from 37% to 45%.
I asked a very simple question based on the independent scorekeepers about who you value, and you're not responding, and I guess that's your constitutional right. Let me move on to tariffs. So at your nomination hearing, I asked you whether Americans would pay the blanket tariffs that President Trump wanted to impose, and you said no. Now, since then, a number of analysts have said these tariffs are going to hit American families like a wrecking ball, something like $2,500 a year. Major companies like Walmart, Mattel, and Ford have all suggested they're going to need to raise consumer prices as the tariffs hit them. Some companies have already had to raise prices, like Stanley Black and Decker. So here's what you said. Nobody's making this stuff up. Here's what you said. Walmart will be absorbing some of the tariffs. Some may get passed on to consumers. Your words. So another chance on the issue. Do American consumers pay the tariffs?
Again, Senator, you're cherry picking because Walmart makes decisions based on their customers. Two other very large retailers, and this is not an advertisement for them, Amazon and Home Depot have chosen not to pass on tariffs. And there seems to be a new version of TDS, which I would call tariff derangement syndrome. And many on your side seem disappointed that there is no inflation today. As a matter of fact, we saw the best inflation numbers since 2020. So there has been nothing passed on. There has been no tariff recession. So no inflation, no recession due to tariffs.
So let the record show that once again, the Secretary of Treasury doesn't think American consumers are paying the tariffs. We say to all those people who are trying to pay medical bills and food bills and the like that are still going up, they know they're paying tariffs. Let me move on to an issue.
I'm sorry, Senator, but
it's my time, Mr. Secretary.
I'm sorry, Senator, but the data doesn't show that.
Okay, we can have a difference of opinion.
Difference of data.
The Senate is coping with health care choices that are enormously important. Just as a matter of your thinking, what do you think is the largest employer in rural America?
Sorry?
What do you think is the largest employer in rural America?
The largest single employer?
No, the sector.
The largest industry?
The sector, yes.
I would assume it would be agriculture.
It is rural health care. And it is why all of us up here disagree so strongly with what this administration is doing. And the tax bill is going to accelerate the closure of rural hospitals, people who basically are the key to surviving in rural life. And our colleagues, Senator Markey, Senator Merkley, Senator Schumer, are going to release new data that hundreds of rural hospitals across the country stand to lose under the Republican reconciliation bill, which apparently you guys don't know is going to clobber the big economic engine in rural America. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about whether you're willing to make changes to protect a crucial area of the American economy. In fact, I think it is fair to say almost all of us up here, the chairman and I, for example, we have the honor to represent a big chunk of the rural West. And I want to know if you're willing to make changes so that we can protect the economic survival of these rural communities, which means their hospitals.
We are quite satisfied with the health care portion of this and the adjustments to Medicaid.
I would just say to colleagues, my time is up. When you're home over the break and the like, ask your rural hospitals if they're satisfied with what they're going to get in the House changes, because I think they'll tell you they feel like they're going to get hit by a wrecking ball, and that'll happen in Kansas and Oregon and all across the land. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for coming in today, and thanks for having this hearing. Secretary Bessent, the last time you were here, I asked you about your emphasis on domestic discretionary funding in your opening statement. You had stated, quote, "We must adjust federal domestic discretionary spending to get our fiscal house in order while striking an urgent tone on our growing deficit." I mentioned to you then that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of our budget. And I think if you were serious about deficit reduction, you might not push for tax cuts that almost certainly could not be offset by discretionary adjustments alone. And now, of course, we know you can't. Today, we actually have the details of your plan. Take health care from 10 million Americans, 126,000 Coloradans. cut nutrition assistance for millions of adults, sunset clean energy investments that are so critical to the American West, give over 40% of the tax benefits of this bill to the top 5%. And it's not even close to being paid for. Even my colleagues on the Republican side, who for years and years and years have claimed to be the fiscally responsible party, now are admitting that it's not paid for. This bill adds another $2.4 trillion to our national debt. It will push the deficit to GDP ratio up to 7%, which you said when you were here before was unsustainable, far from the 3% target that you described. If you look at your proposals taken together, there is no getting around the fact. There is no getting around the fact that the richest Americans receive an average tax cut of $300,000, which, again, we're not paying for with the discretionary cuts that you advertise. So once again, we will have to borrow money in order to assist the people in this country who least need a tax cut at this moment, while the Americans who have been made miserable by the economy that they're in actually see income reduced because of cuts to Medicaid and cuts to SNAP. Meanwhile, and I think, Mr. Chairman, this is really important, meanwhile, interest rates are at 20-year highs. Moody's has slashed our credit rating because of the fiscal irresponsibility of this administration. The World Bank has cut our growth estimates in half, and the bond markets are screaming at us to stop. We now pay, and we are paying this year, more in interest than we are in the national defense. Secretary Bessent, how can you square your concern with fiscal health with deficit finance growth for families that need those tax cuts least?
Senator, I'll begin with that we did not get here. We inherited this fiscal situation that I believe.
Well, you inherited from Donald Trump, who was here. You did, Mr. Bessent.
No,
yes,
sir.
you did, Mr. Bessent. You inherited from Donald Trump. He's the first president to come back after a 4-year hiatus, after we know exactly what the last tax cuts did, which was blow a massive hole in our deficit and debt. You can't sit here and lie about that. It's true. The data, to coin a phrase, the data shows that that's the result. The math shows that that is the result. No one on this side of the aisle admits anymore that or claims anymore that they didn't blow a huge hole in the deficit. They did. And now you're here saying to the American people, let's double down on that. We're going to give tax cuts for the wealthy. We are going to give tax cuts again to the wealthiest people in America, and we are going to finance it on the backs of the sons and daughters of teachers and firefighters and police officers all over this country because we can't pay for it. Because the Treasury Secretary discovered somehow that domestic discretionary spending is only 15% of the budget, and therefore you can't balance it there.
Well, sir, we had a referendum on November 5th.
You certainly did. I agree with
policies. Your side lost.
I agree with that.
And a higher decibel level.
And I'm a rare Democrat who doesn't blame Donald Trump for winning. I'm sad he won. I don't blame him for winning. But don't come here.
In your statements,
go ahead.
They have veracity.
Go ahead, Mr. Secretary. What?
Higher decibel level does not give your statements more veracity.
My statements are true, if that's the word, if that's what you mean by veracity. My statements are true. You blew a massive hole in the deficit when your predecessor was sitting here under Donald Trump. And so the question is, can't we think of something better to do with the money than this debt, than drive up interest rates by borrowing money from our kids so the richest people in America can get a tax cut when they don't need it. That is the reality of your plan.
Well, sir, actually the high interest rates were achieved during the Biden administration in October of 2023, and we have not touched those rates since then. So
the high interest rates.
No, your statement's incorrect.
I'm out of time, and I appreciate the indulgence of the chairman.
Thank you. Senator Grassley.
First of all, I want to thank you for the time you have given me several times to have a personal conversation with you. I appreciate that as well. You're very open to listening to us as members of the Senate. I've made clear that I support President Trump's goals of getting better trade deals for U.S. producers. I've heard from many industries and businesses in Iowa, each one of them in a very unique position due to the tariffs, but all express one common concern and that's the need for certainty around trade. I've spoken with several Trump administration officials and nominees about the importance of finalizing 2 or 3 deals to provide some certainty. So would you agree that trade deals need some certainty and that at the same time provide fair market access for U.S. goods would benefit the economy and provide much needed markets?
Yes, sir. And as I have said, Senator Grassley, there are 18 important trading partners, and definitionally, our largest trading partners also constitute our largest trade deficit. So we are moving deliberately. We are trying to decrease uncertainty, but not at the expense of a generational opportunity to do trade deals to make up for 40 years of bad trade policy. When these countries come to us with their trade offers, some of them have made very good offers, and I look at the list of their tariffs, their non-tariff trade barriers, the potential currency manipulation, and the subsidies of industry and labor. I agree with President Trump. I don't blame these countries for getting away with what they could. I blame the preceding governments that let them get away with it. So we are moving as quickly as we can to get the best deals that we can, and I think we will see more deals coming very quickly.
Yeah. Just not a reaction to what you said, but a supplement to what you said. I think the sooner we could announce 1 or 2 or 3 agreements would notify to the country that you're on the right track. I don't question that you're on the right track, but I think the public needs sooner they can get that message, the better the economy would be. Now, I want to go to something that is of an interest to farmers, and I know you have said several times your interest in agriculture. The Senate Finance Committee has been working on what will soon be 45Z Clean Fuels Production Tax Credit. Implementing this credit properly is important for the biofuels industry and especially for farmers. The Biden administration failed to meaningfully address 45Z regulations. They put some out for comment, but not much beyond that. But the regulations it released for the 40B Sustainable Aviation Fuel Credit demonstrated that Treasury officials in that administration knew nothing about farming. Prior to issuing rules governing 45Z, we need everybody in the Trump administration to take the time to learn a thing or two about farming, how farming works. So this is kind of a question of working ahead, looking after the president signs this bill and regulations are going to be written on 45Z. Would you be willing to work with congressional colleagues, farmer-led organizations, and even this senator to make sure that we get regulations under 45Z that work for farmers?
Senator, as I had my initial meetings back in January with both yourself and Senator Marshall, you both brought up 45Z. And as I mentioned, I go home and do my homework, so I'm familiar with it. I look forward to working with your office and making sure that it is implemented in the most robust way, but that it does not allow for foreign actors to have a backdoor into the program.
Okay, thank you very much. A little bit, probably getting back to the conversation you just had with the senator from Colorado, the 2017 tax law provided tax relief across all incomes with a focus on the middle class. Just as important, the law included pro-growth reforms to incentivize business investment, boosting production, and leading to higher wages. A study published by the National Bureau of Economic Research found in 2017 the law boosted investment 20%. What will making the 2017 tax law permanent mean in terms of economic growth, job creation, and wage growth? That's got to be my last question.
Senator, I believe that the full expensing was one of the most powerful aspects of TCJA, and that has tapered since over the past few years. I believe that going back to 100% expensing for equipment, and what we have added to the bill that I think will be very powerful is the full expensing of factory structures. So not only do we want to make the U.S. the best place to do business in terms of energy dominance, in terms of regulation, we are also going to increase the after-tax return on capital, which will allow companies to thrive here, hire more American workers for good wages.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Lankford.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Secretary, thank you for the work you're doing. I want to just make a quick comment on the full expensing piece that you just mentioned. That's something I've worked on now for several years to get us to full expensing. That is fair tax policy to say to folks if they're buying more equipment, if they're adding it in, if they're investing in their workers and more productivity, that should be able to not have to be depreciated out over years, that should be taken care of that year on it. So I appreciate your comments on that. I do want to switch subjects a little bit and talk a little bit about sanctions. Last year under the Biden administration, best we can tell, the Iranian regime sold about $90 billion in oil. $90 billion. That funded Hamas, that funded Hezbollah, that funded the Houthis, that continued to be able to equip the Russians with Iranian weapons to be able to attack the Ukrainians. This administration has been pretty clear on trying to be more aggressive on Iran because of their nuclear program. We've had a report come out just in the last 24 hours, the International Atomic Energy Agency, saying that Iran has about 900 pounds now of highly enriched uranium, and they seem to be not slowing down at all in their nuclear weapons program. What is your plan at this point for preventing Iran from advancing economically until they stop their nuclear weapons program?
So, Senator, since I arrived in the Treasury building, we have implemented a maximum pressure strategy on Iran, and more importantly, those who trade with them. We have taken many unique steps towards sanctioning, could be something that had never been done before, refiners in China, private companies called teapot refiners. We are also looking to sanction the owners of the refiners and their families if they have property in the U.S. or Western Europe. Just this morning, before coming here, I signed 2 more Iranian sanctioned orders. So we are exercising maximum pressure. We are trying to track down their so-called shadow fleet, because what happens with sanctions, when you put on sanctions, you create a new market elsewhere. Right. So each time we make a move, they try to subvert it. Our allies in the Middle East. During my trip with the president there, I had substantial discussions with their finance ministries and central banks, and they have been very helpful in making sure that there is no leakage through other Middle Eastern banks, trading companies, or financial entities into the Iranian regime.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that. You and I, when we first met, we talked a lot about sanctions and that authority. It has great impact if you use it wisely. And thanks for wise use of that. I was in the Middle East 2 weeks ago. In fact, the week after you were in the Middle East, I met with multiple heads of states throughout the entire region. And what I heard over and over again was that they brought out was, please tell President Trump and the Treasury, thank you for relieving sanctions on Syria. That's smart usage of that. Assad is gone, where we put the sanctions on Assad. They kept saying, thank you for giving Syria a chance to be able to form a new government, not under the sanctions of the old government that is now gone. So I appreciate your smart use of sanctions there and the engagement of what President Trump chose to do on that. One other question about sanctions. You've started aggressively putting sanctions on individuals and family members that are connected to these violent Mexican cartels that are trafficking drugs, that are murdering Mexicans, that are leading to the death of Americans in the way they're pushing drugs into our country. You started engaging in that in a way that has not been done in the past to put pressure on these criminal organizations, which we've now listed as foreign terrorist organizations. Tell me a little bit about that and what the plan is now.
Yes, Senator. So by designating these Mexican cartels as FTOs, foreign terrorist organizations, it gives us much more sanctions authority to go after them and their accomplices, both extraterritorially and to look for them in the U.S. financial system. We are working with institutions in the U.S. on our side of the border, specifically 7 counties that are border counties, to make sure that there is no leakage. And we are constantly sanctioning and examining what is going on with the cartels led by the Sinaloa cartel. This fentanyl crisis, the precursor drugs come from overseas. They are made in Mexico, and they are brought into the U.S. And just imagine if there were a terrorist organization that was killing 100 or 200,000 Americans a year. How would we respond to that? Because this is what's happening. These are terrorists.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I don't know if you remember, but when we first met, I gave your staff a fat binder full of economic warnings of what was going to take place if climate change weren't mitigated. And you indicated that you had actually read the Economist magazine cover article, which at least in its current version now says, as its headline, homeowners face a $25 trillion bill from climate change. To be clear, that's a global effect, not just in the U.S. Since then, a number of other things have happened, starting on the day we met when the International Financial Stability Board put out a warning report to the world's banking system that this climate change problem was coming at them, both in terms of reduced mortgage revenues if the mortgage markets collapse when insurance is no longer available due to climate risk, and in terms of loan-to-value ratios going south when home values fall because the property is no longer mortgageable because it's no longer insurable. So that warning has come out, and I would commend it to you and your team to have an honest look at it. Then First Street, which studies flood risk, came out with a report suggesting that we had a $1.4 trillion hit to U.S. home values looming, again, as a result of the same cascade that was originally, I think, at least best originally presented by the chief economist for Freddie Mac. who said when climate risk gets uninsurable, then mortgages become unavailable and property values crash. And his prediction was that would cascade into a 2008-style recession. That original warning was based on coastal property value risk. Now, of course, we have wildfire-adjacent property value risk that could be a similar catalyst. So I would also urge your team to look at that First Street report and evaluate it. Also, since then, Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve came to the Banking Committee and testified that 10 to 15 years, there'd be whole regions of the country in which mortgages were no longer available because of this insurance/mortgage problem. Allianz, as I think you probably know, is, I think, the biggest insurer in the world, trillion-dollar company with enormous stakes in getting stuff right in the insurance world. And one of their board members wrote an article that I would also commend to you and your team, highlighting the danger to the very insurance model from climate risk, highlighting the danger to the real estate model from failure in the insurance model, and also predicting damage in the financial system, both from the cascade of insurance to mortgage to values to the financial system, but also because a great number of transactions in the financial system are held together by an insurance component that would no longer be available. And I would commend that piece to your attention. And most recently, Fitch has just warned of danger to mortgage-backed bonds and municipal bonds coming from this climate risk, where the mortgages lose. We saw before 2008 what happens when mortgages lose their value because the underlying property isn't worth it. Then it was because they'd faked the value of the underlying property. Now it's because natural causes are knocking down the value of those properties irrecoverably in the case of, for instance, sea level rise. So, you know, I just am continuing to make this warning. I think these are really serious. I come from a coastal state. When you have storm warnings, you should pay attention. When there's storm clouds on the horizon, you should pay attention. So please take a look at those different articles that I've just mentioned. Your team is there to take notes. You've got the tape of this if you're interested. And have your federal insurance office and the Treasury Insurance Office take a look at this. And if you think that this is all wrong, if you think that climate change isn't real or is a hoax, if you think that it's not having an effect in insurance markets, if you think that that doesn't affect mortgage markets or that the unavailability of a mortgage doesn't damage the value of a middle-class home or that regional hits to real estate values aren't going to cause recession, then I'd like to have that argument, that conversation with you. But if you agree with me that those things are all both true and predicted, then I think we have to prepare. And I would urge you to prepare.
Good. Thank you, Senator. We likely agree on the direction, maybe not the magnitude. And I also believe that resiliency must be a component also, and we should move toward greater resiliency.
If you don't mind, when your team have had a look at those 5 articles that I mentioned, and you've got somebody who's on point on this issue, I'd like to have the opportunity to have a conversation with them.
I'd be happy to, and we have frequent interactions with the 50 state insurance regulators as part of the Financial Stability Oversight Council.
Senator Cassidy.
Hey, Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Mr. Secretary, I want to start off with something called historic tax credits. Your hometown, Charleston, I suspect, has used HTCs. One of my hometowns, New Orleans, really took some buildings which had historic significance, catalytic upon redevelopment, into making an area of the town that was declining into something which was vibrant. I think I've seen that there's a 5-to-1 ratio of federal investment So you put up $1, you get $5 leveraged in private investment in terms of the revitalization of a community. But the HTC hasn't improved for about 40 years since it was put in place by President Reagan, and has lost about 25% of its value over the last decade, so I'm trying to reform it. Any thoughts about, any experience with HTCs, and any thoughts about that and its importance in terms of achieving a more prosperous economy?
Sir, I have seen, since my childhood, Charleston go from a small coastal town to the #1 tourist attraction in America, or destination, for I think a record 10 years by travel magazines. So I agree with you, and my team would be happy to work with you on technical assistance for modifications and how to make this better and increase that multiplier effect.
Sounds great. From your lips to the chairman's ears. Now on on 45V hydrogen credits, Louisiana has about $42 billion in hydrogen-related investments due to the 45V credit. But the Biden administration kind of messed us over, in the sense they said you can't take natural gas and make it into so-called blue hydrogen by coupling it with carbon capture sequestration. And so this is just a request. If Congress maintains the 45V credit, can I ask you to commit to working with our office to address the kind of negative treatment that the previous administration did upon blue hydrogen, and something which industry really wants and is using in a variety of ways?
We would be happy to work with your office on that, Senator.
Thank you. You may be familiar with the next from South Carolina, but there are some multi-generational forest landowners, and they will have a tree near the end of its life cycle of growing, ready to be chopped, maximal value, and then a hurricane goes through, a flooding event goes through, forest fire, you name it, and they lose the accumulated value of 20 years. Their insurance doesn't cover the accumulated value. It covers the initial value way back when. And so it's not really the way to insure a product. We have Senate Bill 1141, the Disaster Reforestation Act, which we're hoping can correct this oversight. So as we face both wildfire and hurricane season, my request to you again is if you can help us get the technical assistance, advance this, and otherwise, if we can get it through Congress, help implement.
Senator, I'm unfamiliar with that bill, but it makes sense that embedded gains should be insured, so my team will be happy to work with you.
Thank you very much. One thing I've been very interested in is, and a different tact, is how our federal agencies are using computers, oftentimes with the computer language COBOL. I studied COBOL in 1979 at LSU. And the federal government's still using it. Like the federal government's the only industry that's still using COBOL. And contracts are let, and 3 years later, the company which gets the contract has not fulfilled its contract. The people who tell me they know what they're doing, and I believe this, say, listen, let a contract say 6 months, you got to be up and running, because that's how you guarantee results from somebody who's previously done it. Can you give us an update on the kind of technical update occurring within Treasury?
Senator, I learned COBOL in 1980 in college also, and I will tell you that these tech updates are both shocking in their efficiency, but more shocking in the waste that has gone into them. The Treasury slash IRS systems, mainly the IRS, began a tech update in 1990 that has cost upward, we may be approaching $50 billion, $3.5 billion per year is spent, and there is no end in sight. We are working diligently to have that system off of COBOL and into a workable modern programming language by the end of this administration.
Praise God. Thank you, sir.
Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, always good to see you. Thank you for your service and your busy travel schedule. you know if it's me, I'm going to raise an issue that I share with a lot of folks on this committee, but particularly my friend, the chair, around CDFIs. You know, Senator Crapo, who is the co-chair of the CDFI caucus, you know, broadly bipartisan. We got 28 senators, equal number of Ds and Rs. You know, this should be a no-brainer. And I appreciate in private and in these testimonies that you've reaffirmed the values of CDFIs. So I was more than a little bit surprised, since we get an 8-to-1 leverage off of every federal dollar that goes into this public-private partnership, when the administration's fiscal year 26 budget seeks to cut the CDFI programs by over 50%, number one. And at the same time, the Department, Treasury, seems to be slow-walking the deployment of the existing 25 funds, since 75% of them have not been, of the appropriated funds have been actually obligated and spent out. So first question should be a really easy no-brainer. Can you go ahead and commit, yes or no, that the administration will follow the law and go ahead and obligate the unspent 75% of the fiscal year 25 CDFI funds?
Senator, this is the first I heard of it. I will commit to having an answer to you.
Well, I just say, listen, I have great respect for you, as we know. It's against the law to withhold appropriated funds. You've been supportive of this. Yep. I'll even, if we need to, I can get the chairman to nudge you a little bit as well. But you know, it is concerning to me that 75% of the funds.
Senator, this is the first I've heard of it. I've consistently stated that.
No, you've been great. So let me just go to
we will have an answer to you by the beginning of next week.
Okay.
And Senator Warner's right. That's my next question if I had one. So.
Thank you. So let's go to the 26. Fiscal year budget, where you're cutting CDFI fund by over 50%. And I guess I don't get it. These are 8-to-1 leverage funds. Every federal dollar get a great leverage return in the private sector. You know, there was a review by which was fine, of CDFI and how they were going or not was going. And, you know, your department has affirmed to both Senator Crapo and myself and all of our colleagues that the CDFI fund programs are statutorily sound. So if they're statutorily sound and they got an 8-to-1 return on every federal dollar in terms of affecting underserved communities, why be cutting the whole program by 50% in fiscal year 26?
Yeah, so Senator, I understand the bipartisan support. We have created a new $100 million award program for rural communities. So I hope using that we can rebuild the seat.
Well, I would ask you to take a look, because I know about the rural program, and I support rural CDFIs, but there are suburban needs, there are urban needs, and I just really think, and I know you support what Senator Crapo and I and others do, this 8-to-1 leverage. I hope you will go back and take a fresh look at that. I think this is one of the areas where there is huge bipartisan support, and we ought to not walk away, and I'm grateful for your willingness to take a look at that as well. I want to move to another one that we've talked about. I think one of the things about our system, and we all know we need ways to improve taxpayer compliance and make things better at the IRS, but I think our whole system works on voluntary compliance. And we've got about 85% of our citizens pay their taxes on their own. I think that's a lot contingent upon their trust that their personal data is not going to be manipulated or used elsewhere. So I've raised this with you, and a number of written letters on this. We've been hugely concerned about the Doge boys coming in and potentially accessing this information. And I can tell you, I hear from taxpayers regularly in Virginia who are afraid about whether they should go ahead and work with IRS going forward. We wrote to you in April. We wrote to the acting commissioner, Faulkner, on this issue, and he basically said nothing to see here. So this notion that data is going to be protected, but at the same time, the IRS Doge boys came up here and at the staff level briefed about the fact that they are creating these tools to suck out information. And just a couple last comments. I've actually put a bill in to try to increase the penalties on misuse of that private information. But can you, again, in front of us, assure us that the private information of citizens that will get us that 85% voluntary compliance will not be abused in terms of the DOJ process of sucking out this IRS information?
So, Senator, what you're referring to is 6103 of the IRS code, which ensures taxpayer privacy. And as I have said, some enthusiastic people, I think, had the motto, move fast and break things. At Treasury, we move deliberately and fix things. And we have made sure that any access is compliant. And we are, I've repeatedly said, collections, privacy, and customer service. And on the privacy aspect, as you know, there was a leak in the previous administration through a contractor who is now in jail. I can't remember whether he was fined $5,000 or $10,000. We do not know the terms of his plea deal, but I would support an increase in both the monetary penalty and the jail time.
Absolutely. And we work together on my bill. Last one of my time's overrun, but there are huge concerns, at least in my state, that these DOJ boys are sucking that information out. And I think you'd find in individual conversation with other senators, this is not unique to Virginia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome. I think it's pretty interesting that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle now, when they're not in charge, are all concerned about massive deficit spending and the impact that'll have on everyday Americans. I think it's appropriate to have a little history lesson here. I put together a report. I've given you a copy of it. We'll talk about it a little bit later. But, you know, it shows I didn't have time to really blow these charts up, but the impact is so dramatic, so glaring, I can just do it in a little 8 by 11-inch piece of paper here. This shows that under President Bush, his 8 years, he averaged $250 billion a year deficits. Then President Obama came into office with filibuster-proof majority, and they blew the lid off of that. For the next 4 years, we averaged deficits of $1.27 trillion. First time we ever had a deficit over $1 trillion. That sparked the Tea Party movement. I'm part of that, and actually put some restraint on spending and deficits. For the next 7 years, we averaged $661 billion worth of deficits. It's still way too high, but reasonable compared to today. COVID hit. We had a massive bipartisan spending spree, $3.1 trillion deficit. We went from $4.4 trillion of spending to $6.5 trillion. Now, a responsible president, responsible party in power in 2021, as the economy recovered, unemployment came down, would have returned to pre-pandemic levels of spending and deficits. But that's not what happened. Instead, under President Biden and Democrats in charge, they averaged $1.9 trillion worth of deficits. So again, we went from $661 billion in 7 years, COVID, then we've averaged $1.9 trillion in deficit spending over the last 4 years under the Biden administration, Democrat control. And unfortunately, this is the projection, CBO's baseline projection over the next 10 years, another $22 trillion worth of deficits, averaging about $2.2 trillion. That's the problem. And Mr. Secretary, I appreciate in your opening statement in your confirmation hearing, you repeating what the chairman said in his opening statement. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And again, here's the chart that shows that. 4.4 to 6.5. Now, I don't know of an American family, honestly, if they had an illness, had to borrow $50,000, pay medical bills, if that family member got well, they would keep borrowing $50,000 and spend at that level. But that's what Democrats did. We never went back to pre-pandemic levels like our responsible leadership did during World War II. I think this is interesting. We entered World War II spending 11.7% of GDP on federal government, went up to 41% But by 1948, we were down to 11.4%. They realized he can't continue spending. He had to get back to a pre-war level. So my question is, I've given you this draft report. I want to release it hopefully next week. I've given this to Kevin Hassett. I would really like your input into this, because these are just the facts. And the facts completely bolster what you said in your confirmation hearing, that we do not have a revenue problem. We have to promote economic growth. It's a primary component of a solution, but we don't have a chance of returning to a balanced budget if we don't return to pre-pandemic levels of spending. And I've laid out a number of options going back to Clinton in 1998, Obama in 2014, President Trump in 2019. Leave Social Security, Medicare, and interest as they are, as you spend, but all their outlays, actual outlays, increase them by population growth and inflation. We literally would have a baseline spending somewhere between $5.5 and $6.5 trillion. And if we actually return to that 6.5 over 10 years, we might get down to something like a $500 billion deficit again with 3% growth. Again, it's all contained in here. I really would appreciate your input, but do you just have a comment on that? And can you give me some assurance you provide me some feedback and input?
Senator, I always give you feedback, and thank you for this. And look, as I said, I'm committed to changing the trajectory of this, and there are two ways to do it. There is through spending restraint cuts and through growth. And I think that is a very difficult calculus to achieve. We are trying to navigate that calculus. So as you said, 3% growth will change the trajectory. We must fix spending. But what I have also said is we did not get here overnight. I have gained about 10 pounds since inauguration. I'm not going to cut off my arm to get back to my January 20th weight. I'm going to eat less, exercise more, and that is what we are trying to do with the federal government.
No, you were left with 4-year average deficits of $1.9 trillion, spending that now exceeds $7 trillion when just 6 years ago it was $4.4 trillion. So no, you inherited an enormous mess. Not to even mention the open border. But I really do appreciate your effort here. We want to work with you to solve this problem. It's a massive problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Hassan.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Wyden, and good morning, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for joining us this morning. Secretary Bessent, in your confirmation hearing, I asked you whether any of President Trump's policies would increase costs for families. You said that there is, quote, nothing I can immediately think of, close quote. Mr. Secretary, have costs for new parents increased or decreased under President Trump?
I'm not sure how you're defining that, but overall inflation is down for the first time in 3 years.
Well, let me provide you with some data then. The answer is that costs have gone up for new parents. As the ranking member of the Joint Economic Committee, I just released a report this morning that shows that costs have gone up nearly 25% for the most popular baby items since Trump's main tariffs were imposed. This includes a price increase of more than $40 for the most popular infant seat on a car seat on Amazon. And Mr. Chair, with unanimous consent, I'd like to enter the JEC minority report into the record. Thank you. Secretary, with his reckless tariffs, the president has imposed a 10% national sales tax on imports into our country. So, Mr. Secretary, do Americans pay tariffs?
Senator, thus far, we have seen no price increases due to tariffs.
Well, what I just asked you was whether Americans pay the tariffs.
Again, as I told the ranking member, Walmart has decided to pass along some portion of the tariffs. That is a private decision. Amazon and Home Depot have not.
Well, let me just tell you. Let me tell you what's happened to one small New Hampshire business. And can we have the charts up here? Because you're essentially testifying that Americans don't really pay the president's across-the-board 10% tariffs. Behind me is a receipt from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection showing that a small distiller in Salem, New Hampshire, paid the United States government $2,600 in the president's new tariffs on a single shipment of lemons from Italy. And I have the same receipt for about the same size shipment that they had before the tariffs went into effect, and that $2,600 was not on the receipt back in, I think it was March. So since you testified that Americans don't pay the president's tariffs, will the Treasury reimburse this New Hampshire small business for these tariffs that they paid to the United States government?
Again, Senator, a luxury product from Italy, I think we have to look in the aggregate, and the aggregate is showing us that thus far, contrary to many wishes, that there has been no inflation from tariffs.
So first of all, this is a small distiller in Salem, New Hampshire that employs people. And now it's got a monthly or bi-monthly expense of $2,600 it didn't have. And it's either going to, lay people off, stop producing some of its products, but its business isn't going to grow with a new $2,600 charge unless it's going to pass on the price to American consumers. So I just want to be clear. You all need to own up to the fact that tariffs are taxes. They are a sales tax. I think you noted in the Oval Office recently that the president's tariffs would raise $2.8 trillion over a decade.
I was quoting the CBO.
So the CBO now says it. So that's now about a $3 trillion tax that Americans will pay.
No, ma'am.
A sales tax.
Much of that is being absorbed by the producers.
Well, that certainly isn't true for new parents. In addition to the 5 popular products on Amazon that new parents need, there's another. We did another analysis on a baby list registry. New parents in America will pay total over the next year about $875 more for their products than they would have paid before the president's tariffs. Now, lastly, I just want to note that the CBO has made clear that the Republican budget bill will take away health care from millions and millions of Americans, both Medicaid coverage and the Affordable Care Act coverage. Not to mention, it will trigger a $500 billion cut to Medicare that will impact providers and rural hospitals. And it will add trillions of dollars to the national debt. So, Mr. Secretary, this is all to pay for massive tax cuts to millionaires and billionaires. Why, sir, do you need a tax cut at the expense of health care for millions of Americans?
Well, I would dispute those numbers. 1.4 million illegal aliens receive Medicaid.
But the CBO, first of all, they don't receive federal Medicaid dollars. And secondly, the CBO says without counting that, it's still, I think, 11 or 12 million Americans who are going to have their health care ripped away so that people in your income bracket can get massive tax breaks. I think that's un-American, and I think that's unfair, and I think the American people understand that, too. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman, just 10 seconds. Senator Hassan, thank goodness for bringing tariff receipts.
Senator Cantwell.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Secretary Bessent. There was the Wall Street Journal seems to be doing a daily editorial about the president's trade policy. Yesterday or maybe it's today, about the strategy or lack of strategy. So I just wanted to see if I could, thank you. I wanted to see if I could get your thoughts on that in the sense of, do you believe in a rules-based trade regime?
I believe that the international economic system has failed the American workers, Senator. And for too long, we have adhered to a system that does not work. And I believe in Einstein saying that doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome is the very definition of insanity.
Okay, so I'm trying to get a philosophy here, but I think you just gave it to me, so I guess you just gave it to me. I don't understand how we in the United States don't win without saying that we're going to have a rules-based system. I mean, part of how we win is we get more people on our side about the rules and set the rules and then make everybody adhere to them. So if it's not rules-based, then it becomes more ad hoc in the process, and that's why I think it is troubling and hard to follow. So I guess I don't need to ask more about multilaterals, because I don't know. Do you think the administration believes in multilaterals?
I believe that we attempt to use multilaterals, but I believe that it has failed the American people. We have these gigantic trade deficits. There is something called the China shock, and workers were left behind, and working Americans have suffered because of this. So, here, Senator, as an example, China, the second largest economy in the world, in this multilateral system that you seem to like, is considered a developing country. Under what measure are they a developing country?
I personally believe in bilaterals, multilaterals, but I represent a very trade-dependent state, so I want to open more markets, and I also believe that the economy is way bigger outside the United States than inside the United States. So I'm just trying to get what the philosophy is, of the administration. But you've answered two questions, very helpful in that. Can I ask you a few more? One, I wanted to know whether the investment tax credit, we have a investment tax credit that we made as part of the CHIPS and Science Act. That is the 48D Advanced Manufacturing Investment Credit. And these are important for us in our competitiveness. And do you believe that this 48D tax credit should be extended?
I'm unfamiliar with that. I will get back to you, but I would note that I believe it's substantial that it has not worked. That we
well, it hasn't been in place very long. Hasn't been in place very long. So part of CHIPS and Science was let's attract this sector in competition to what other countries were doing back to the United States. And so there were investments that did that, but there was also a tax credit to help level the playing field against those other countries to make sure the United States was receiving that investment in the United States. So if you could.
Well, I will get back to you, but I believe that may have also included many bells and whistles that even Secretary Raimondo experienced or expressed great frustration in making this provision work.
On the 48D tax credit, do you gentlemen, I think you're both supportive of it. I don't think that's right, is there?
This may be the one that Senator Wyden and I got in the bill.
Yes, so I'm just, okay. Well, maybe we'll give the Secretary a little more familiarity and you can come back.
Well, if you give me more familiarity,
yes. Yeah.
I may be conflating it with the CHIPS Act.
Yeah, okay. TikTok, next week is the 90 days are up. And clearly China is trying to make this part of the negotiation, but we would like the law to be enforced. We passed it. What is your, where are we with meeting this deadline that was set next week? And what do you think is the, how does this relate to the broader negotiations?
I have no visibility into TikTok. I can tell you it was not discussed at the meetings in London.
Okay. So we will try to get some information from somebody else in the administration about that. But next Friday, I think, is the deadline, and the Chinese keep seeming to use it as some sort of, so it's good to know that they didn't bring it up. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for taking the time to be here today. And I want to say thank you for the outstanding work that you have done on behalf of our nation as you have tried to help with trade negotiations, as you have looked at policy that affects each and every one of us. I do want to talk a little bit about economic growth and tax fairness, tax relief. I think as we look at extending the TCJA, and of course, it's interesting that many people don't realize that this is really a Tax Cut and Jobs Act 2.0 that we are debating and we are getting ready to pass. And we all know the CBO is consistently wrong when they give us numbers. They use static scoring. They do not use dynamic scoring. They never assume that taking an action is going to give you a positive reaction. And it causes the CBO to be wrong. And we repeatedly see this. We chuckle about it sometimes, and it's why people like me think that we need to have a range and look at what CBO says and then what other outside entities have. But when we talk about economic growth and we look at what happened in our nation after 2018, and then we look forward as to what has happened, we know that tax receipts last year were at their highest, and we know that much of that came because of the TCJA's passage, and that we need to make those cuts permanent.
Yes, ma'am.
So that we continue and we spur economic growth. But I would like for you just to talk for a moment about, as you look at this and look at permanence, the difference that that will make in giving individuals and mom and pop businesses on main streets in Tennessee. Most of our jobs are small businesses addressing these pass-throughs. So I'd love for your comment on that.
Well, first of all, Senator, I'd like to congratulate you on what I would call the Tennessee economic miracle. In terms of, I was recently in Nashville, and it's just all the hallmarks of a boomtown with controlled growth, prosperous, the business community, happy citizens, and everyone in the income distribution doing well. Permanence is essential, and when we pass the one big beautiful bill, what will happen here is we will no longer be talking about tax cuts. We will be saying that this is the permanent law of the land.
Policy.
Just as now, we are not discussing the corporate tax rate. That was made permanent. That has brought home a huge amount of tax revenue from overseas subsidiaries. We no longer see these so-called inversions. I talk to companies almost daily as the CEOs come in to see me, and they tell me that they are paying a much higher percent of their global income in the United States because of the certainty in the corporate tax rate. Once we make these provisions permanent, I believe we can see an acceleration. We will continue to make the United States the best destination for capital to start your business in the country. And importantly, I think that now it will be an opportunity for Main Street, because unlike big corporations, the families, individuals who want to start small businesses will now have great assurity, and we could see a Main Street flourishing thanks to this permanence. And whether it is the increased expensing again, whether it is certainty, because for a Fortune 500 company to make a capital allocation does not threaten their viability. For an individual, for a mother to try to start a business, that she needs to know that she has permanence and certainty, and I think that we can create a whole new age of entrepreneurship.
I agree with that. I appreciate your comments about Nashville. One of the things that has helped us in Tennessee is when I was in the state Senate, I led the fight against imposition of a state income tax. And then we made no state income tax permanent by an amendment to our state constitution. And being given to that permanence in policy has served our state very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good. And I would hope you would plan a trip to Columbia, South Carolina, and speak with the governor and the assembly there about doing the same.
Thank you, Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to ask about the Republican big, beautiful bill, which will knock about 16 million people off their health care coverage and cut programs that keep groceries cheaper for millions of families in order to try to pay for about $4 trillion in tax giveaways that are mostly going to be sucked up by millionaires, billionaires, and wealthy corporations. So, Mr. Bessent, Secretary Bessent, I'd like to start with a very simple question. Will this bill increase or decrease the deficit?
They're varying scoring on that, Senator Warren.
You're the Secretary of the Treasury, so I'm asking you. What is your view? Will this bill increase or decrease the deficit?
It is my view that over the 10-year window, it will decrease.
You know, do you have anybody who agrees with you on this?
Yes, ma'am.
Let me ask my question.
Okay.
Every credible independent expert agrees that Trump and the Republicans' big, beautiful bill would add trillions of dollars to the national debt and would not even come close to paying for itself. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, the Penn-Wharton budget model, and the Yale Budget Lab all agree on this, and they're looking at 10-year windows, thank you. So do the Conservative Tax Foundation and Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, conservative groups. Even Elon Musk and the Wall Street Journal are criticizing the bill for ballooning the national debt. The only people who are saying publicly that it's not going to add to the national debt are you, Donald Trump, the Republicans in Congress. Do you have an independent group that has put forward numbers that disagrees with all of these conservative groups and disagrees with the Wall Street Journal on this?
Well, Senator, interesting to see you aligned with Elon Musk, but if I add...
You're no more shocked than I am.
If we want to take the full congressional budget scoring, they predict, and I don't agree with their methodology, they predict a $2.4 trillion deficit. But
okay, so the answer to the question is yes.
No, but may I finish? They include that, but they've also scored $2.8 trillion in tariff income. So even in Washington, D.C. math,
okay, so,
in Washington, D.C. math, that is a $400 billion surplus.
Okay, so let me make sure I understand. This bill, you admit, will increase the deficit by $2.4 trillion, but you think there will be another bill and another set of agreements that somehow materialize, haven't materialized so far, don't have any statutory authority, but that will make up the difference. So the answer to the original question, will this bill increase or decrease the deficit? I think you just said it will increase. This bill increases the deficit.
No, I want to use all the CBO scoring, and you can't take one without the other. I don't agree with the CBO.
One is the law that we are scoring, the bill that is in front of us. We don't have a tariff bill in front of us to score. Mr. Secretary, let me go on to the second question. You have said that government spending is, quote, out of control. You have also called government spending, quote, unsustainable. In fact, in the name of fiscal responsibility, you're working with the Republicans on this big, beautiful bill to pass the biggest cuts to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act in American history. So, Mr. Secretary, help me understand here. Why is the national debt so very important that you're trying to kick 16 million people off their health insurance, but increasing the national debt doesn't seem to matter if you're cutting taxes for billionaires and billionaire corporations?
Well, first of all, a huge portion of this goes to family-owned businesses that are pass-through entities that are below that level, Senator, and I am sure you share my goals of Main Street prosperity.
You know, I'm glad to do tax cuts for people of modest means. The question I'm asking is, why does the deficit not matter to you? We're talking about knocking 16 million people off their health care, but it matters it does matter to you if we're knocking people off their health care, but not.
Well, first of all, that figure is overstated by 5.1 million. That is an amount not attributable to provisions in this bill.
So you think it's okay just to knock 10 million people off their health care?
First of all, let's set that straight. Work requirements account for 8 million of CBO's claim number. Again, we're creating an economy that promotes and rewards.
It's clear, Secretary Bessent, that you don't want to answer the question.
No, Senator, I am answering it.
No, you're not.
And what I want is for Medicaid to be used for mothers and children as it was meant, not for 1.4 million illegal aliens, not for able-bodied people.
Medicaid is not used for people who are not documented. Mr. Chairman, I just want to say here, the part that troubles me the most is that the Secretary is deeply worried about the deficit and is willing to knock 16 million, or as he says, merely 11 million people off their health care. Matters so much. But it doesn't matter so much if you're cutting taxes for billionaires. Then it's okay to run up a big deficit. I think that's wrong.
We do have some differences of opinion. However, we also have a time crunch. I'm going to ask the remaining senators, and including any of mine who show up, to stick with the 5 minutes, please. And next is Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair Crapo, and I will stay within my 5-minute allotment.
Thank you.
I want to just start actually out by making an observation, which is that there seems to be an argument here today, the Republican argument, that somehow we can't give middle-class tax cuts without also giving big tax breaks to billionaires. So I just want to be clear. I think I probably speak for everybody in my caucus that Democrats want lower taxes for middle-class, working-class people. We just don't think that the price for that should be giving, in this case, the top 0.1% of income earners $400,000 in tax breaks while we're taking health insurance away from 16 million Americans because of Medicaid and because of the Affordable Care Act changes and cutting nutrition support. So I just want to be clear about that. That is, the choice is not no tax breaks to middle-class Americans, because we're in support of that. But I want to ask you, Secretary Bessent, I want to follow up a bit on the questions that Senator Warren was asking. One of the features of the big, beautiful bill is significant, I would argue historic, cuts to Medicaid. You no doubt know that Medicaid is the largest health insurance payer in the United States. That's according to the American Hospital Association. It's the largest provider of mental health care coverage in this country. What percentage do you think is people on Medicaid that can work, do work? Do you have any thought? Do you know what that percentage is? I'm trying to...
Well, work requirements account for 8 million of the CBO's claim numbers, so they seem to think that 8 million people could come off. So
I'll tell you, this is data from the Kaiser Family Foundation in 2023. 92% of Medicaid adults under age 65 are working already. And so what is happening here is the big, beautiful bill is making it so much harder for people to get the health care that they deserve that they just give up. But I want to ask you what impact you think this is going to have on the economy. So you've got health insurance that is taken away from 16 million Americans. My question to you is what happens next? Because, you know, the data shows that when people lose their health insurance, uncompensated care goes up. That's the issue with rural hospitals. Medical debt goes up. People delay care and they ration their medications. People get sicker. So this has a direct impact on medical debt. Do you have an idea what the current medical debt is in the United States?
I do not, but I will tell you that I believe that that number you're giving is overstated by 5.1 million, and it's simply the Democrats' scheduled expiration of Obamacare subsidies, and you should have extended that when you were in control and didn't.
I'm not going to argue with you about whether it's, you know, how many multiple millions of Americans are going to lose their health insurance.
I like precision in numbers.
Well, I will believe in the precision of my numbers, okay, Secretary Bessent, but I can give you some precision about what the medical debt is in the United States. It is $220 billion. That is, again, according to the American Hospital Association. So let me ask you, how do you assess the impact of additional medical debt on American families, Minnesota families? What impact do you think that has? Because it seems to me to be pretty significant.
Well, Senator, we are trying to bend the curve on medical cost And I believe that the medical expenses are out of control. We have seen
but you're not controlling medical expenses by taking insurance away from people. You're just shifting the cost to hospitals and individuals and uncompensated care.
We are trying to make sure that individuals who can work do, and we are trying to get the program back to the mothers and children it was meant for.
Mr. Secretary Bessent, the question I want to try to get you to hone in on is, can you see that if we take insurance away from people, medical debt is going to go up, and that is bad for families, and it is bad for our economy because people are going to be burdened with additional debt.
It will be good for the economy for people to come back into the workforce.
But Mr. Secretary, nearly everybody who can work, who is on Medicaid, does work. And in fact, we've seen, I have no doubt, I won't get in the way of Senator Warnock, who I'm quite sure will want to talk about this as well because of the experience with Georgia. You're not saving money. You're just shifting cost to other places by taking health insurance away from people. Mr. Chair, I will close here and give back my 16 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Smith. And for the remaining senators who came after my last announcement, we are under a time pressure here, and so I've asked all senators to please stick rigidly to your 5 minutes. And next is Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Bessent, I hope you help me stick to the 5 minutes. Mr. Chairman, before I begin, I just want to share to you and to the ranking member that I hope this committee will soon welcome Secretary Kennedy before the committee as well. There are many pressing questions, especially from those of us that come from states where there's been a measles outbreak. He's been impossible to get in touch with. He doesn't respond to letters, all the rest. I hope we can work together to get him here. Secretary Bessent, we've talked about the 333 plan a few times. And this included, if I remember correctly, not just with our personal private conversations, but also in this committee, that it included reducing the deficit to 3% of the gross domestic product as well. Secretary Bessent, is it true that the United States bond rating was just downgraded? Yes or no would work.
One of the agencies did lower the U.S. bond.
So, Mr. Secretary, if you need it, I'll give you the article. It's right here. The United States rating was downgraded. The answer is yes. I hope you can help me stick to 5 minutes, please.
The answer is yes, and
I appreciate that.
Mr. Secretary, if I may, Larry Summers categorized the bond downgrades as lagging.
Mr. Chairman, can I get an extra minute? Can we tell the witness to please work with us on this 5-minute thing?
No, let's just please keep moving quickly.
Please work with me on this, sir, so we can get through this as quickly as we can. Yes or no, is it still your goal to reduce the deficit to 3% of GDP?
As I said, something that starts with a 3 by the end of President Trump's second term.
Is the answer yes?
That would be a yes.
Appreciate that. Yes or no, did the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office report that the so-called big, beautiful bill would add $2.4 trillion to the deficit?
The CBO did that and added 2.8 of tariff income.
Appreciate that. Well, we'll get there. Yes or no, does adding $2.4 trillion to the deficit advance your goal of reducing the deficit to 3% of GDP?
I think that's the false statement, so I'm not going to answer it.
You disagree with the CBO score?
Aggressively.
Well, here's a CBO score. If you want to see it, I'll give it to you.
Okay, and what I'm not sure.
Yes or no?
I'm not sure how you responded to the CBO score and Larry Summers' warning on the budgets that were passed 2 years ago.
Mr. Secretary, yes or no? Is it still your goal to reduce the deficit to 3% of GDP?
As I said, to something that starts with a 3 by 2028.
Appreciate that. The Republican tax scam also steals $800 billion from Medicaid, almost $300 billion from the Affordable Care Act. Yes or no, will that impact Americans' health care benefits?
Again, it doesn't give a yes or no answer. It doesn't lend itself to a yes or no answer.
Well, the answer is yes. 16 million Americans will lose their coverage because of these cuts. I can cite that as well. According to the congressional budget, Mr. Secretary, I didn't ask a question.
Then why ask if you have the answer?
Mr. Chairman, can I get your help here? According to the Congressional Budget Office, the Republican tax scam cuts $285.7 billion from the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as SNAP. Yes or no? Will those cuts make it easier for children, veterans, seniors, folks with disabilities, parents, and grandparents to put food on the table?
Again, that does not lend itself to a yes or no answer. You seem to have the answer, so I'll just take it from you.
Well, Mr. Bessent, the American people have told everybody here that's not a billionaire that the answer is no. I'd invite you to come on down and visit some of these food banks.
The American people told what they wanted on November 5th.
You know what folks back home are saying, Mr. Bessent, that they voted for this president and said this is not what they signed up for. Well, he promised he would not touch our Medicaid. He promised he would not go after Medicare. He said to all the folks over here that have a vote, keep your hands off the nutritional food programs. And you know what they've done? The exact opposite, sir. You know the truth. The American people just want the truth, Mr. Secretary.
Sir,
let me go on here.
You get to have another referendum in 2026
let me go on here,
and
though,
2028.
Let me go on here. Let me ask you about the tariffs, since you brought that up as well. Do you believe that the tariffs are going to cover the cost of the big, beautiful bill?
I believe, again, you seem to like CBO scoring, so CBO scoring says $2.8 trillion of tariff income.
Well, surprise, surprise, Mr. Secretary, this is not from CBO, this is from a conservative think tank. They say no, that's a lie. Mr. Secretary, I think the American people just deserve the truth here. Like, that's all that we're trying to get at here. Sorry to be so abrupt with this line of questioning here. Let's just be honest with folks so that they can plan their lives out. People that are on Medicaid, Medicare beneficiaries, or on food programs, let's just be honest with them so that they can make plans. The farmers and ranchers who entered into contracts a year ago that had that pulled out from under them, be honest with them so they can plan. All these small businesses, that's all we're asking. Thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Warnock.
Thank you very much, Brother Chairman. Secretary Bessent, Georgians are deeply worried about the economy. Costs continue to skyrocket for families. Markets are volatile. Investors are dumping U.S. Treasuries. The warning lights in our bond market are flashing, and Moody's just downgraded our credit rating for the first time in over 100 years. While this administration's tariffs policies are largely responsible, the $30 trillion national debt is still the biggest long-term threat to our economy. Just last year, we paid nearly $1 trillion in interest on the debt alone, more than the federal government spent on educating and feeding our children. Secretary Bessent, are you concerned about the trillions this Republican tax bill will add to the debt?
I am concerned about the stock of debt that we inherited. And the Senator, I'm going to have to correct you, costs have not skyrocketed. We had the first decrease in inflation in April. The inflation numbers this week were 0.1%. 0.1%. Markets are up on the year in the U.S. Tariff income is substantial. And the U.S. is the only major bond market where the 10-year yield, the 10-year yield is lower now than it was on January 1st.
You don't agree?
Not Germany, not Japan.
Sir, you don't agree that this is going to add trillions to the debt? I didn't say that is your testimony. I think I heard it earlier. I'm looking at numbers from the right-leaning tax foundation, which says the bill will increase the debt by $1.7 trillion. That's the right-leaning tax foundation that says that. The Conservative Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget says that the cost is up to $5 trillion, and the nonpartisan CBO, which has served as an inconvenient reality check for both parties, says that the bill will cost $3 trillion.
No, sir, it says 2.4, and it also says there'll be 2.8 trillion of tariff income.
So they all agree that this is going to add trillions of dollars to the national debt. Here's the thing. I think most Democrats, including me, support extending the 2017 tax cuts for the middle class and for the working class. In fact, I think we should go further than this Republican bill on the child tax credit. You talked earlier about children. I think we ought to center children. We ought to take on child poverty in this country, which we did when we passed the expanded child tax credit. We are just not willing, I'm certainly not willing, to cut 16 million people, up to 16 million people off of health care and explode the debt to give tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. 71% of the people on Medicaid in Georgia are children, 71%. If we extended the tax cut For those making, for everybody except those making over $400,000, we wouldn't have to be kicking all of these people off of health care. We wouldn't have to have these huge cuts.
Senator,
Let me finish.
I will.
Well, let me finish. We wouldn't have to cut all of these people off of SNAP. We wouldn't have to cut all of these people off of health care if we would extend the tax cuts for everybody except those making over $400,000 a year. Now, that is what Congress should do, and I think that's what it did when it was extending the Bush tax cuts in 2012. It was a bipartisan deal, reasonable, cut taxes for everybody except the wealthiest Americans. Secretary Bessent, if Republicans fail to pass their big, ugly bill, would you be willing to work with Congress on a Plan B bipartisan tax bill, one that extends the Trump tax cuts for everybody but the wealthiest, so that we don't have to kick 16 million people off of health care and take food from hungry children?
Well, sir, I believe the bill will pass, and I believe that everything you've talked about decimates small business, and one of the reasons that we have seen Main Street not flourish is the lack of certainty, because the propensity of small business owners make more than $400,000, and they file through the 1099 program, so they could be in the 800 to 1.5 billion range. I want to see small business flourish, not more government dependency, Senator.
I think kicking 16 million people off of health care is a drag on the economy. It's a drag on small businesses, and I can quickly tell you that in Georgia, where they're doing this work reporting requirements program, and that's what it is, it's reporting. They're not incentivizing work. They're kicking people off of health care. Most of the costs have gone towards the administration of the program. We got 500,000 people in the health care coverage gap. They covered 7,000 people. I think that's pathetic, and I think we can do better than that.
Well, I do too. I think able-bodied people should work.
We certainly shouldn't replicate that to the whole country.
I think able-bodied people should work. I think the benefit should go to Americans. And as you said, if 75% of
the way to help able-bodied people to work is not to take their health care, sir. Thank you so much.
I will remind all senators that we're under a time crunch, and I'm asking all senators to stay to their 5 minutes. Senator Welch.
I'm forewarned. Thank you. Do my best. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Is it the position of the Department of the Treasury that the cost of these tariffs will not be borne by the consumers of this country?
It is the empirical evidence so far that they have not been, and we think that it is likely that they do not have to be.
So when Walmart says it's raising prices to reflect the increased cost that they have to pay for the product as a result of the tariff, you disagree with that?
I agree that Walmart will do what is best for their customer, and as I have repeatedly said, this is not an advertisement for Amazon or Home Depot, but they've announced that they will not be raising prices, so my family will be shopping there.
So when I talk to a manufacturer in Vermont that has 300 employees, and they are now paying more for steel and aluminum components, and they tell me with their margins that they will have to increase the price to the ultimate consumer. You disagree with that manufacturer from Vermont?
I agree that the economy, or believe that the economy is a diverse ecosystem, and for the manufacturer you're talking to in Vermont, that there will be price decreases elsewhere, and that I was at a rally in Pittsburgh, and there will be more steel jobs.
Well, that's a different issue. I'm talking about who's going to pay the price if there's a 50% increase in the tariff.
Senator, thus far, that the critics of the tariffs, first we heard there's going to be a terrible recession, and the economic numbers have been robust. And then we heard there's going to be great inflation, and the inflation numbers overall are 0.1%.
Right, but my question, I'm a manufacturer, or I'm a farmer. I'm paying 25% more for fertilizer. My margin is tiny, 3 or 4%. And me as a farmer producer have to pay more for my inputs. You're telling me that I have to eat that cost, and I am not going to be absolutely required for my own survival to increase the cost to reflect the tariff that I pay.
Senator, I am happy to send you 2 articles, one from the Wall Street Journal, one from a Bloomberg columnist admitting yesterday that he has been surprised by the lack of inflation in the system, and the Wall Street Journal article saying, and this has been my supposition, that the Chinese business model is full of state subsidies. They do not care what they pay. It is a jobs program, so they will eat the tariffs.
Well, the farmer, the farmer I'm talking about is buying fertilizer from Canada, not from China. So I'm hearing you, and basically you're saying everything's going to be fine because the folks that on whom the tariffs are imposed are going to eat that additional cost and not pass it on to the consumer. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Or the fertilizer producer in Canada will eat it to sell to your farmer. And I think it's very...
We'll see. I get it. We disagree on that.
Yes, but thus far the empirical data is with me.
All right. This is sort of pretty hopeful on your part, and I'd say not particularly realistic. Second thing, one of the things that Vermonters are telling me, and everyone from farmers to businesses, is they need some stability and predictability. You'd agree with me that predictability and stability is absolutely essential for the well-being of an enterprise.
That's why I'd encourage you to vote for the tax bill and give great stability and predictability for taxes.
I'll take that. I'll take that advice under consideration, as they say, Mr. Chairman. But let me ask you this: predictability and predictability. The Trump tariff timelines, February 1, executive order, 10% on China, 25% on Mexico and Canada. February 3, 30-day pause on 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada. February 10, 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. March 4, an additional 10% on China, 25% on Mexico and Canada. This goes on and on. 22 different tariffs. And it looks like the president wakes up, kind of checks his mood, and changes the tariff regime. And I've talked to manufacturers where they've had products coming in to a port, and if they arrive on Monday, they're cool. If they arrive on Wednesday, it's going to cost them another $75,000. Just in terms of implementation, 22 different tariffs over the course of a few months.
Good.
Does that help? I'm mindful. This will be my last question.
Yeah, I'm just saying, Senator, if you're familiar with game theory, it's called strategic uncertainty, and it's also called negotiations. 13 days ago, on a Friday, President Trump threatened the EU with 50% tariffs. The EU was not negotiating in good faith. Within 10 hours, we had calls from 5 European leaders and a call with Ursula von der Leyen. So you may call this a flip-flop. I call this a negotiating strategy, and this is the way negotiating strategies work.
Vermonters call this pretty painful, and it's a way to run their business. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I'll remind all senators we are under a strict 5-minute time frame for each senator. Senator Daines.
Chairman Crapo, thank you. Secretary Bessent, good to have you here today. I can't help but, as I was listening to my colleagues across the dais here, as you reminded them, we sat right in this very room during the Biden administration, and Lawrence Summers was warning about you can't be shoveling trillions of dollars of stimulus spending, unpaid for spending into the economy without being inflationary. Summers called it right. We called it right. They got it wrong. And that same CBO that got it wrong then is getting it wrong right now as it relates to this current battle we're facing on this amazing bill that will stop the largest tax increase in American history and will make some of the largest cuts, true spending cuts, to this runaway spending of the federal government in American history. And Secretary Bessent, I want to set the record straight on that and thank you for your leadership as we're moving through this very important process to get this bill on the president's desk by the 4th of July. So thank you. I want to talk a bit and dialogue on the China negotiations. You've been grateful for your leadership working through this tough negotiation right now with China. You've played a very active role in the ongoing trade negotiations. 42% of the world's economy is comprised by what happens in the United States, in China. So this is high stakes. I recognize the need to hold China accountable on key agreements. I remember when Senator, now Ambassador Perdue, and I were in Beijing in September of 19 negotiating that Phase 1 trade deal with Liu He back then. Thank you for continuing to work with China and holding them accountable to commitments made under President Trump's first administration. Safeguarding American IP, curbing forced tech transfer, ensuring fair access for U.S. farmers and ranchers, addressing unfair tariff and non-tariff barriers are all key priorities to ensure that we do have more fair and balanced trade with China. I want to thank you for the recent de-escalation on tariffs as you reach that Geneva consensus, as well as the President's efforts to bring China to the negotiating table. I truly hope these talks will continue and both sides hold up their end of the bargain. Secretary Bessent, what do you see as the next steps? You're right in the middle of this negotiation to secure a comprehensive deal with China that puts U.S. farmers, U.S. manufacturers, and consumers on a level playing field.
That's, in my mind, one of the single most important economic questions of the next few years. Will there be a continued decoupling between the world's two largest economies, or is it possible to rebalance together? Senator, President Trump would like the U.S. economy to rebalance toward greater manufacturing, bring down the trade deficit. The Chinese continue to add manufacturing capacity. Currently, they are 30% of global capacity, up substantially since 2020. Under the cover of COVID, they increased capacity. They are in the midst of a substantial real estate downturn. Some would call it a crisis. They have very low consumer spending, and so they need to rebalance to more consumer spending, address their domestic imbalances, but they cannot do that on the workers of the rest of the world. So if they are willing to be good partners and approach a negotiation where the U.S. brings back manufacturing, precision manufacturing, high-paying jobs, and the Chinese are willing to open their economy to American products, then we could do that together. But there's a lot of wood to chop there, sir.
When I was in Beijing in March, I met with Vice Minister Ma. Wang Yi was out of country at the time. I met with Vice Premier He Fang, and then finished my time there, those 48 hours, meeting directly with Premier Li Qiang. One of the issues that we brought up, and President Trump had asked me to push hard on this, was getting the Chinese to stop the shipment of fentanyl precursors into Mexico, as well as some into Canada and even the United States, but the precursors. What are your thoughts, and what are you hearing right now from China in terms of their efforts to stop these precursors, the leading cause of death for 18 to 45-year-old Americans today?
Yes. So, Senator, there is a 20% fentanyl tariff on China right now. For the first time, that seems to have gotten their attention. What the senator from Vermont would have called a flip-flop, President Trump calls negotiating leverage. And so for the first time at both the talks in Geneva and the talks in London, they brought someone from the appropriate ministry to address this problem. And it is a real problem. And look, you and I, both have a lot of experience in dealing with the Chinese. You have more on-the-ground experience, but we know when they want their system to do something, it responds. And I believe that if they want to address these precursors, as they should, then we will see if we get a serious response. Because if they want to address it, they can fix it.
Secretary, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. I don't think anyone can argue with us that this bill will prevent the largest tax cut in American history. No one can argue that. But I think beyond that, as I look at this legislation, between the tax savings and other provisions, it'll mean $1,000 a month of hardworking Americans being able to keep in their pocket. And you mentioned some numbers. When I add them up, a family that's making $50,000, $100,000 a year will, I think, be able to keep $1,000 a month more of their hard-earned money. Can you add some background what you think it means to middle America?
Well, let's take the opposite tack, which I don't like to think about, Senator, is what happens if it doesn't pass? Yeah. It's the largest tax hike in history. It could mean a sudden stop in the economy. And as always, working Americans would get hit the hardest. They would lose their jobs. We would see substantial uncertainty in both the consumers and the business. What it does mean is that working families have a chance to cure this affordability crisis, this terrible affordability crisis that was brought upon them the past 4 years by this incredible inflation. So if we think about it, the affordability crisis is two pieces: the accumulated inflation, and that is affordability, and then the ongoing inflation. So thus far, Trump administration, we are getting very benign inflation numbers, and in terms of the accumulated affordability crisis, there are two ways to address that. We are trying to push down costs, whether it's fuel, healthcare, others, but the best way to address the affordability crisis is exactly as you said, for Americans to have higher real after-tax incomes. And that's what this bill does.
And ironically, it seems like I saw a figure last month that indeed that's what's happening in this last month or so.
The April number of 0.7, 0.8% was outstanding, sir.
That's great. You know, I'm reminded of an old saying back home that figures lie and liars figure, and I'm just disheartened by some of the intellectual dishonesty that I hear going on in this room. But I don't think anyone can argue that this bill will prevent the largest tax hike in American history. We're going to cut, I bet, close to $2 trillion. You can't argue about that. We're going to secure the border. The child tax credit, again, taking your situation, it'll actually, we'll lose child tax credit, go from $2,000 to $1,000. And President Trump, 45, we increased from $1,000 to $2,000, now again to $2,500. Republicans leading the charge to increase the child tax credit as well.
Go ahead. And Senator, the important thing here, the child tax credit becomes permanent.
Oh, wow.
$2,500 is permanent.
That's good. Let's talk about the importance of growth. You and I have ran businesses. Yours are much bigger than mine. Need to go do a live hit here in a second, but yours are much bigger than mine. But we're used to data coming in, and all your advisors coming in, and the CBO is one of our advisors. There's so many advisors, but you and I are used to sitting there and saying, taking all this information and saying, based upon everything out here, we think this is what's best for this company, in this case, this country. When I look at this, the Trump policy, it spells growth. Growth in the economy, growth like we've never seen before. And I just want to give you a moment here to talk about how important growth is. And then absolutely we need to address the spending in this country. There's no doubt we have a spending problem. But the first thing we need is growth. We need to freeze our spending for all practical purposes. Again, recent numbers, I think, have been pretty good as far as growth of the economy. How is this bill going to impact the growth of the economy of this country?
Again, I think the certainty of this will help small and large businesses. I think the 100% expensing is going to be very powerful. As I'm out on the road, companies are telling me that they are holding back on CapEx because President Trump did say in his address to Congress there would be 100% expensing dated back to January 20th, but they can't be 100% sure that this bill is going to pass. Nothing's 100%. Especially in this town until it's done. I'm highly confident, and I think that we could see a CapEx boom here.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Young.
It's great to see you, Mr. Secretary. I know you're quite busy. And so I'd like to dive right in and start asking you about tariffs. Wall Street Journal says today, and what was a somewhat critical editorial, that they encourage a smarter trade strategy. A smarter trade strategy would be to work with allies as a united front to counter China's predatory trade practices. Instead, the administration has used tariffs as an economic scattergun against friends as well as foes, they say. I'll give you an opportunity to respond to this, Mr. Secretary. There are more than 140 countries that count China as their top trading partner. And of course, China has a massive domestic market and great productive capacity. And so they have a measure of leverage. And there's this dynamic that if we use tariffs, but not as part of a larger strategy, working with allies and partners, that we could be stealing market share from one another, and China will continue to manipulate prices. They will make dependency on their economy hard to reverse. And the alternative would be maybe what the Wall Street Journal proposes, which is we unify large economy, democratic countries, unify and collectively apply a lot of pressure vis-a-vis state capitalist countries, China in particular, to bring them into a position of better behavior. I feel like that there's something to be said for the strategy that they encourage. And the argument would further be, I'll elaborate on it, that if you don't adopt that sort of strategy, you just end up increasing input costs for many of our manufacturers in the near term, and behavior doesn't really change. What say you to this line of critique?
Thank you for this, Senator. Look, I think this is a multi-step process. Our allies have also taken advantage of us. I would say that the EU has been very intractable in negotiations. I had a back and forth with an EU official who said, well, your tariffs are terrible. I said, really? Then why do you have a 10% car tariff on us? And when we look at these things, we have many of our allies, including Canada, is about to enact a retroactive digital tariff, digital service tariff, because we have the greatest, really the only outside of China internet companies in the world. So they see a big pool of money. So we will deal with our allies. I warned my sister I was going to say this today. My sister and I fight all the time, but we iron it out and then move forward. That we will iron it out with our allies. When we put up the tariff wall on China,
yes,
I told our allies, especially the Europeans, and the Canadians and the Australians, this merchandise is going somewhere. Get ready for it.
Yes.
And unfortunately for them, I was right.
So Mr.
We are using the OECD, which China is not a member of, and we will see if China can be a reliable partner. So I think it's a two-step. Do trade deal, get the deals, get fair trade with our allies, and then we can worry about China.
Yes, that's exactly it. And then you can worry about China. You just articulated what I think the Wall Street Journal is encouraging. That's frankly what I've been encouraging for a number of months, which is reset trade relations, use the substantial concessions that the president has commendably been able to get from our trading partners, our major non-China trading partners, pocket those, maybe ask for a little bit more, and he's very good at that, reset trade relations, and then go after the big guy on the block. So to use your analogy, when there's a bully outside, get your sisters together and make sure they're with you as we work to bring them into position better behavior. I hope we see more of that moving forward. It's good to know that that's the policy you're pursuing.
And I would say that I was with the president in his trip to the Gulf states, and the president of the United States travels and comes back with substantial investment commitments from Saudi Arabia, from UAE, from Qatar. When the Chinese leader travels, he has to give money out. So the Chinese can only buy friends. The Americans have inbound investment, and we want to keep with this bill to make this the best location.
Yes, and we also want to make sure that as we ask for concessions from our friends, that we don't alienate them. This is always a balance, right? So they'll continue to come with bags of money and invest in the United States, knowing that it's not only financial incentives that drive them to invest in the U.S. and partner with us. I'm already a minute past my time. It's funny how this happens. Thank you for indulging me, Chairman.
And you're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, there's no doubt we've had this conversation. Your fiscal policy is quite unconventional. And time will tell, history will tell whether you were right or wrong about it. Let me ask you this. Do you think the administration's tariff policy is an efficient way to generate revenue for the United States?
I think that it has several features. One, it is an efficient revenue generator. Two, it can rebalance decades of trade problems.
And was it your intent to impose those tariffs to counter the $2.4 trillion deficit that the reconciliation bill would impose?
Well, I don't agree with the 2.4 trillion number.
Was it your intent to raise the tariffs to counter whatever deficit the reconciliation had to pay for?
The intention, part of the intention with the tariffs has always been to raise revenues.
Right. But you keep, as my colleagues are talking to you, you keep countering the 2.4 deficit with the 2.8, saying that there is going to be a deficit. So they're not related, or they are related.
Your colleagues have a fixation on CBO, and I
don't want to get an argument with you. I'm just using your own words. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. So it doesn't matter. They're not related.
Sorry, they're coincident, not causal.
Okay. Perfect. That's all I needed from you. Let me ask you this. Do you think that tariffs are taxes?
Sorry?
Do you think tariffs are taxes?
No.
No, they're not?
No.
Okay. And you keep talking about utilizing tariffs to bring jobs back to this country, which I agree with. But I haven't heard from the administration or from you, what types of jobs in manufacturing are you looking to bring back with this tariff policy?
We'd like to bring back precision, high-end manufacturing.
But what type?
Look, it could be semiconductors. We obviously want to bring back steel. I think what we have seen, Senator, I think a good way to think about it, there are strategic industries that we discovered during COVID.
Such as?
The pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, steel, So
you want to bring those jobs back here, but anything else?
Sure, there's a whole array, whether it's auto manufacturing.
So I would ask that you give me the whole array, because if you have this in mind that you want to bring these jobs back, we should all be working together to focus on that. But I haven't heard this administration identify the types of manufacturing. So I would look forward to that. If you can send that to me, that would be great.
I'm happy to send you that, but again.
Let me ask you this,
and I know you're
Mr.
a business person, and business is organic. This isn't the Soviet Union. We don't have a list of what's going to happen.
I know, but you're talking about moving into the 21st century and the jobs of the 21st century. I think they should be high-value jobs that we're all focused on, and I think there should be a plan, strategy around it.
I mean, agree.
Any business needs that, right? Including government. Good. In a letter to investors that you sent in January 2024, you said that wrote that tariffs are inflationary and would strengthen the dollar. Hardly a good starting point for a U.S. industrial renaissance. Do you still agree with that?
No, that's been completely wrong.
Okay. There's been a lot of talk about small businesses and whether they're being impacted or not. If you would like to know the true impact, I welcome you to come to Nevada and sit with my small businesses. They are being impacted. There is uncertainty and chaos. I hear it from them all the time. They're concerned whether they can keep their doors open or not. I've heard from the trade ambassador that this administration has made the decision to look at short-term pain for long-term gain, quoted by the administration. And I don't think my small businesses are going to be around for that long-term gain because their doors are going to shutter. So what do I tell them they are being squeezed by the tariffs because high costs are impacting them, the fact that they can't keep their doors open, and the fact that this administration really isn't looking out for small businesses across the country, what do I tell them?
Well, I would disagree with the idea that we're not keep looking out after small businesses, and small business optimism just hit a new record. So,
sure, so tell me what I tell my small business. It's not helping them to say, well, the secretary said that, this policy is out there and you should be optimistic. That's not working.
If this is my wish list, you could tell me you're going to vote for the tax bill and give them great tax certainty.
The tax bill will give them tax certainty, and the tariffs do not give them tax certainty. So the tariffs are going to continue, and that is the problem. If they cannot afford the goods for their products, if they cannot afford to keep their doors open, this reconciliation bill that you're pushing through has nothing to do with the fact that they still have to pay for those goods. I know I've gone over my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I just do have to insert here that if we don't pass this tax bill and extend the TCJA, those small businesses' tax rates are going to go up massively.
I understand that, Mr. Chairman, but we also have to recognize they're also going to lose access to their health care, and their health care costs are going to go up as well.
Well, we'll argue on that one. Senator Sanders.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Bessent, for being here. Help me out here. My understanding is the Trump administration has, I think, 13 billionaires in office right now, leading government agencies. Is that about right, do you think?
I have no idea, Senator.
I think that's what the number is. Do you think it's a coincidence, given the large number of billionaires in the Trump administration, that this particular piece of legislation would provide $235 billion in tax breaks to the top 0.2% by expanding the exemptions in the estate tax?
Senator, I will tell you that when the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed, my tax rate went up.
Well, I don't know your exact situation, but I can tell you. Tell me about how many people do you think are in the top 0.2%?
Sorry?
Number of people in the top 0.2% who would benefit from this particular $235 billion tax break.
Well, the top, I know the top 10% is right. now paying 7%.
That's not the question.
The total tax.
My question is, why do you think at a time of unprecedented income and wealth inequality, when people like yourself economically have never, ever had it so good, why do you think it's a good idea to cut Medicaid for low-income and working-class people by $700 billion to give $235 billion in tax breaks to the very, very, very richest people in this country, perhaps a few hundred families? Please justify that and tell me about that.
Well, Senator, I don't know, but the Democrats had the trifecta, and there was no tax increase or wealth tax on billionaires. You choose.
I'm not talking about a tax.
You chose not
Mr.
to do that.
Mr. Bessent, I am not talking about a wealth tax. Explain. A few hundred of the wealthiest families in this country, $235 billion tax break. Explain to the American people why you think that's a great idea.
I think that this will increase small businesses substantially. That most small businesses, they are...
Has zero to do with, come on, you're smarter than that. This is the top 0.2%. This is not a mom and pop store. These are multi-billionaires, and the savings go to their kids after they pass away. This is nothing more than a gift to billionaires in this country.
Well, sir, that's just not correct, because the top 10% paid a bigger share of taxes after TCJA.
I'm talking about one provision in this. I don't want to argue with you about taxes in general. One provision, few hundred families, $235 billion in tax breaks. You can't justify that because morally it is totally unjustifiable. Let me ask you another question. If you guys want to cut $1 trillion in Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, the estimate from CBO, I believe, is that over 15 million people lose their health insurance. Yale University and University of Pennsylvania estimated that when you throw that many low-income and working-class people off of health care, some 50,000 people a year will die. Tell me why you think it's a good idea to give tax breaks to billionaires and allow 50,000 low-income and working-class people to die unnecessarily?
Senator, first of all, that's overstated by 5.1 million. That is not attributed to this bill. It is simply
It's a combination. That's true.
No. You all had a scheduled expiration of Obamacare subsidies, and you did not extend that when you were in charge. 5.1 million, 1.4 million illegal aliens on Medicaid.
All right, look,
and there are work requirements. And our goal is to get more money to children and mothers.
Really? Your goal is to get more money to children, and working people. Really? Come on. Do you know how many people, and I was surprised to hear this, I don't know if you know it or not, how many people lose their jobs every year, quit, or get fired or whatever? Do you have any idea?
Well, there's something called the quits rate, and so when the job market is strong, more people quit.
But yeah, I was surprised that I just researched this. I don't know. Do you happen to know?
I don't know the number.
I was surprised. Would it be shocking to you? It was to me. 20 million people leave their jobs a year. Doesn't shock you, right? It's a big labor force, right?
Yep.
So some guy leaves the job, maybe they move, maybe something happens in their lives, right? We have a lot of transition in the labor market, correct?
Maybe they get a better job.
Right, exactly, maybe they do. Or maybe they have to stay home, their wife gets sick, whatever, we don't know. But 20 million people lose their jobs in a given year, leave their jobs in a given year. Are those people lazy? What happens when I leave my job and maybe I have to move to another state to take care of my ill mother? And I desperately need Medicaid. Am I too lazy now to be able to get Medicaid?
I think that's a mischaracterization of the work requirement.
Really? Well, I'm not quite so sure it is. I don't. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. I've been trying to keep everybody right at 5 minutes so that I can get out of here. I was supposed to get to the floor. That's why I was rushing everybody. That's not going to happen. And so I will just take another minute or two with you, Mr. Bessent, before we wrap up. You've received a lot of questions today about the $2.4 trillion score of the CBO. And you've explained very well that the president has raised a number of dollars in tariff revenue, and we ought to be looking at the combined activity, in my opinion, of what the president and the Congress are doing together, including this one big bill, as well as many other actions of the president and Congress.
And Senator, if I may for a moment, just to show I also interrupt Republicans, is that the CBO, I am not attacking the people who work at the CBO.
Sure.
I am attacking their methodology, and the methodology is completely illogical. It assumes baseline growth of 1.7 or 1.8% for the economy, if the tax bill were to expire and we would have the biggest tax increase in history. CBO still believes we're going to grow at 1.8%. I think we could see, there is a chance that we could see something maybe even approaching a double-digit decline. I don't think it would be that severe. On the other side, when we give permanence to this bill, when we reiterate and reinstate the expensing, we get no credit for the acceleration that we are going to see. And so that is why I reject the CBO scoring. That the $2.8 trillion in tariff revenue is, as I told the senator, coincident.
Well, thank you. You anticipated my question, and I'm going to just elaborate a little more and then ask you a final characterization here. The CBO does not use dynamic scoring, at least not very well. And as you indicated, in the CBO score that shows a $2.4 trillion deficit, it assumes that the economy is not impacted by the bill. That the bill, I'm reading, by the way, from a CEA report, and I think you're probably familiar with this report. Kevin Hassett is the one that shared it with me. And so I'm reading from the CEA's analysis of this. CBO's current 10-year economic projection assumes real GDP growth will average 1.8% over the next 10 years. Assuming an average growth rate of 3%, however, which is what is, I think, predicted to be a low assumption with regard to what the impact of this bill will be, it implies a $4.1 trillion additional revenue to be collected over that 10-year period. So I guess my question is, if we were to look dynamically rather than statically, and start with the CBO score, that is a static score, and then evaluate it dynamically in terms of what it will do. The CEA says if you just assume a conservative estimate of 3% growth in the economy, that you'll see $4.1 trillion of additional revenue. Could you just comment on that and your observation as to what you think the likely impact of this bill will be if you look at it in terms of what real revenue will start coming to the government?
Senator, an acceleration in the growth rate is a game changer and a trajectory changer. And we could start seeing a substantial debt paydown aside from any of the coincident tariff scoring. And my guess is that you then go into a virtuous cycle, because as you're paying down debt, the interest rates come down, and it would actually be even better. And I worked with CEA on that, and we actually I think did some fairly, I wouldn't call it harsh, but some very regimented modeling in terms of the outcomes and what the other variables would be. So there were people who were pushing for higher growth. There were people who were pushing for lower interest rates. And I think we used very, very realistic assumptions in there.
Well, thank you. What I heard you say was you think that the CEA analysis is solid and accurate and maybe conservative. And am I right about that?
I think it is extremely robust, and that I think it's important to have upside surprises.
So for those who want to continue to quote the CBO score, I think they should at least also acknowledge that there is a dynamic analysis starting with that score that shows what the real impact on the economy and the real impact on the deficit will be. And by my math, using the numbers in the CEA report, using the robust and very rugged analysis that they do, it would be a $1.6 trillion or $1.5 or $6 trillion deficit reduction rather than a $2.5 trillion deficit increase.
And Senator, other than the many other tragedies of COVID, one of the economic outcomes that was not allowed to happen was when you think about the 100% expensing for the period of President Trump's first term, that you eat the expensing in the front years, but you are really, however you want to say, cocking the spring, pulling the rubber band back, and then you get the full economic might of the new industrial equipment, the jobs that have been created. So COVID interrupted what I think would have been a very powerful path up because of that expensing, the creation of new capital stock, and the creation of new jobs.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate your analysis. I appreciate all the great work that you're doing. And I also appreciate you giving us the time you gave us today. And with that, I'm going to run to the floor, and so this hearing will be concluded.
Thank you.
Oh, wait a minute. Before I say that, I'm supposed to say to my colleagues, questions for the record are due on Thursday, the 19th. Close of business? Close of business by Thursday of the 19th, and now the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.